And Brian Kelly met with the media yesterday, Jake. Again, a kind of run-of-the-mill thing in a lot of ways. He did open up with a great joke, finding himself $10 for being late. But then also kind of punching back at Lee again, talking about how, does that come out of the advocate's pocket, yours? But it was a good joke to start the presser. Jake, what stood out to you in Brian Kelly's press conference yesterday?
I like how open he is in a press conference. He's not trying to hide information like we see so many coaches try to do. One thing that stood out to me when he talked about Mississippi State, and we're going to get into it, Zach Arnett runs that 3-3-5. He brought it over from San Diego State to Mississippi State, and he talked about, it is built for a spread offense, the 3-3-5 is.
Yeah.
And so he said, okay, we have to do things that kind of go against that. So he's kind of giving you a little bit of the idea of what they want to do in this game. So are they a spread team? Yeah, they're a spread team. Almost everybody is, but that tells me that they want to do some things that are more physical, right? They want to do some things. Maybe, you get John Emery back, so maybe you run something with him. It's going to be a little bit more physical. You have some physical running backs. I think your 3 top backs are physical running backs, and so I wonder what that's going to entail. I mean, because you've got a couple of tight ends. It's a position that you've still probably got some worries about, but they have played better, right, from week 1 to week 2, and you believe in Mason Taylor. So I want to know what that physicality, what it's going to come from, what the scheme is going to be for that, because when he kind of laid it out, that made me think they're going to try to at least do something that's a little different than what they've done.
Yeah, and they haven't ran the ball. Well, I mean, I guess it's tough to say, right, because you were in a position where that second half against FSU, you couldn't really afford the luxury of trying to run the ball too much. And then obviously I'm not going to take anything out of really running the ball against Southern. So I think it's tough to say exactly how I expect him to translate that into the game, Jake, because I still don't know how I think this rushing attack will do against an average SEC defense, right? That's what Mississippi State feels like to me. I was watching that Mississippi State-Arizona game this morning for quite a while, and the defense is not, it's definitely not bad. In fact, it's got a lot of returning experience, and as far as Mike Leach teams go, I would venture to say it's probably actually one of the better defenses that he's ever had. But the D-line, at least to me, Jake, did not look like what Florida State was bringing to bear, right? So I think the offense should have more success. But then I'm just so still unsure about LSU's offensive line, and so that's where it becomes a bit hard for me to parse exactly how I think this is going to play out right now on Tuesday. I'll know more, I think, as the week goes on. But when you look at LSU right now, Jake, that was my big takeaway from the presser. They're saying the O-line remains the same. That they liked the Dellinger switch, that they thought that it graded out how they wanted. And it is all a bit interesting. So for those that don't know, the new line is now Campbell at left tackle. You have Dellinger at guard. You got Charles Turner at center. Then Anthony Bradford, and then Miles Frazier, right?
Yep.
And I guess why this is surprising, Jake, is already Dellinger back at guard when you spent all camp training that man for center, which is, again, even if you play him at guard, not the worst thing, right? Because now you have depth there that you didn't have before, et cetera, et cetera. But it is a bit interesting that you spent all camp training him for center. All of the quotes that Brian Kelly had preseason were about his emergence making everything else fall into place, right? It seemed like that was the key move on the offensive line. And after one bad game, it's out the window now. It's gone, and Dellinger's at guard and Turner's at center, and we'll see what kind of dividends it pays. I mean, look, man, if you're getting your best 5 on the field, get your best 5 on the field. I don't really care, right? Like, they were so bad against Florida State. Try some new things, sure. It is just a bit surprising that you spent all of camp in a different lineup, and now when it actually matters, you're immediately going back to something that you haven't had a ton of time with in terms of this grouping.
I agree with you. Remember, they did start, though, with Turner at center. He was a center in the spring. And also that Brian Kelly's talked about this offensive line isn't as athletic as he's used to. So Charles Turner does give you more athletic ability at that position. He's been someone who's played tight end when he first got to LSU. Yeah. He's played tackle. We saw him against UCLA last year. So you do have more athletic ability when you place him at center. So maybe there's something to that. Dellinger, maybe he did great with the calls. At least that's what we heard. but he gives you, I think, more physicality at a guard position. So now you have Bradford and Dellinger there at guard. That's more physicality, and you have your athletic body right there in the middle. And again, I'm not hating on the center position. It's incredibly hard, but you are a little bit more protected.
Yeah, physically you're absolutely protected.
So you do have two guys next to you. So if Turner's a little limited there, but he wants a more athletic body at that position, that does give that to you. But we looked at the grades, and Frazier did struggle out there at tackle. So that's somebody that you were counting on. He was one of the highest rated guys in the transfer portal. I mean, everyone wanted Miles Frazier to be on their team from FIU. So you need improvement there because the other guys, their grades did go up from week 1 to week 2. He was the only one that did not.
Well, and to be clear, they did also say they want to rotate. So it's not going to be a static offensive line. They want to work multiple sets of tackles in there. I wouldn't be surprised if maybe I don't know exactly who will be. I think somebody will give Will Campbell even a couple series off, probably at left tackle. Certainly Cam Wire will get some action at right tackle. So it's not going to be completely static. And right tackle still could be up in the air. Washmouth says, talking about, BK talking about Dellinger earlier in the year. T-Wap, that teaches you not to believe a word that BK says in his press conference about how the team is doing #coach speak. I don't actually think that's the case, dude. I think it's more straight up, which is, you could argue, maybe more worrying. But look, a lot of times, man, you don't know how these things are going to play out until you play a game. You think you know. And so when BK says that Garrett Dellinger's emergence is what caused everything to fall into place and puts that line out there in game number 1, he's putting out the best line he thinks he has, right? Like, it can't be coach speak. He's not lying. If he had thought that this line they're using now, if he had believed that to be the best line they had, it would have started against Florida State. They just didn't think it was. And it may still not be, right? Like, that even still has to be proven. It was a good showing against a much lesser opponent. But no, I don't think coach speak comes in to do with it. Maybe a bit of a misread, right? And we'll see. We'll see how this line does. Again, against a Mississippi State defense that is solid, not great, and a D-line that is not – you're giving them great status?
I'm not giving them great, but they got some Jimmys and Joes.
Where's their best position of strength?
I think it's on the defensive line.
Okay.
Because coming into the season – like Tyrus Wheat, somebody that we know, we've seen him play for a long time. Nathan Pickering is somebody we've seen play for a long time. Now, they both grade in the 70%. Wheat is 76.2 on the season, and Pickering is 71.2. But we've seen them in the SEC have big moments before. Mississippi State returned 17 total starters on this team. We've talked about that. 9 on the defensive side of the football. They returned 85% of their overall production. It is top in the SEC. It is 7th overall in all of the FBS. And so they have experience. That's not what you have on your offensive line, at least together. Like Will Campbell, obviously, freshman, not a lot of experience. Dellinger doesn't have a ton of experience. He does have some. Miles Frazier, still a young player, doesn't have a ton of experience, certainly doesn't have it here at LSU. Charles Turner, not a ton of experience. And so that's the one thing when you look at that matchup that worries you a little bit is all the experience on the defensive front for Mississippi State, all those players coming back, and they've graded out pretty high. Now, there is some players on that defensive line. Their nose tackle, Banks, only graded out 56.4%, and he was somebody on film that kind of showed up having a lot of missed assignments. You could tell he was in the wrong gap. The linebacker was trying to make up for it, trying to two-gap everything, but Wheat and Pickering are really nice players, and they have a ton of experience.
Yeah, I think, like I said, I think that Mississippi State has a lot of experience. It's probably the best defense or one of the best that Mike Leach has ever had as a head coach, especially because normally on that side of the ball they don't have a lot. But, I mean, statistically still they're solid, but it's nothing overwhelming. They're 8th in the SEC in scoring allowed per game. In total defense, they're 7th in the SEC, right there with LSU. And you may say, T-Bob, how much can you put in stats right now? Mississippi State, you kind of can. They've had 2 solid opponents in Memphis and in Arizona. Like those aren't awful opponents from which to draw a 2-game sample size from. It looks like they're elite right now, Jake, at in one area that LSU has not been very good at. And or at least wasn't good at in game number 1, and that's on third down. Right now, Mississippi State, Jake, is converting 64% of their third down. So they have been elite offensively there, and then defensively, they're allowing just 26%. So it's like we talked about with who did we talk about like this with last week? I can't remember. I talked about a team where they were doing a very good job. Oh, it was Texas against Alabama. Texas was doing a very good job of getting a lot of small wins during that game that would set up these big plays, like the most impactful big moments, and they weren't getting enough of the big wins in those